To that end, hello, we are welcoming is it Martin?
Martin, yeah.
Martin Doyhenard. He's been here before, Doyhenard, right?
Yeah, I've been here 2 years ago.
Thank you for joining us again. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, you are with Portswigger, and you are helping us figure out how to bend the rules of web cache exploitation. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Talk us through this. Why are you taking this topic on, and why do we need to bend the rules of web cache exploitation?
Well, the topic was really interesting because nowadays we are facing many applications using CDNs like Cloudflare, CloudFront, Akamai, and all of them are just web caches. So it was really interesting to find new ways of exploiting them and to compromise almost any application because, as I said, there's not a single real productive application that is not using a web cache. So it's going to be really important for anyone exposing their website to the internet.
What are some of the rules that you were able to bend?
So basically, to determine if a response should be cached or not, should be stored, the web caches are going to use different rules evaluating the URL, and this will tell them if the response is static. And so the idea was to look for ways to break those rules, to find a way of confusing the web cache in order to make him think that the response is static and should be stored when it actually contains some sensitive information from a victim, and so the attacker is able to exploit that and obtain the information.
And that was successful.
Yeah, fortunately it was successful against many different companies. Tomorrow I will be showing which were the companies. There were a lot of big names, and it was even worse because most of the CDNs that I tested, like the big names, were all vulnerable to almost all of the techniques. So the worst part is that as they are not actual vulnerabilities because they are just discrepancies between an HTTP server and a cache proxy, it's really hard to fix them.
I understand. So it's really just identifying that the vulnerability exists that is critical.
Yeah, it's identifying that there's a difference between how a web cache and an HTTP server parse a request. It's really similar to what happens when we look at different vulnerabilities like HTTP smuggling, where we are just making the HTTP server being confused and thinking that the meaning of the request is different than the one that is observed by the cache proxy.
And what is the remediation? Because it can't necessarily be patched, correct?
Well, it's not really easy because most people will not be able to fix a lot of things. They will just need to change their configuration, their entire setup. So in some cases, combining some CDNs or some cache proxies with a specific HTTP server is going to make the vulnerability arise. So the idea is if you cannot fix the vulnerability by adding some protections I will show tomorrow, you can just change the HTTP server you're using, which is not the ideal case because it's going to be really hard for many companies, and that's why probably we are going to see a lot of vulnerabilities related with these kind of things.
Can you walk me through sort of the real world, how this breaks down, where the CDN sits versus the web caching? If you could just sort of paint the picture for us of what's happening.
Yeah, so basically the CDN is the actual place where we all connect. So whenever you go to a website, let's say any favorite website you are probably connecting through the direct URL. So let's say you want to go to Google, you would say www.google.com, but you are not actually connecting to Google, you are connecting to a CDN. So web cache proxy, which is actually a cloud, and so you are connecting to one of these different proxies, which is going to forward your request to the HTTP server, which is Google at the end of the day. But the attacker is able to identify that there is a cache proxy, so that's what we are attacking. We are not attacking the backend server, we are attacking the middleware, the thing that is handling all our requests. And we usually don't realize this, but for instance, Cloudflare is handling almost 20% of all the traffic in the internet, and that's just Cloudflare. So it's really hard that you are actually sending a request and it's going directly to the HTTP server. It's probably being handled by a CDN, which is used to make things faster. So when you send a request, the CDN is going to try to resolve that request instead of forwarding it to the origin server, and that's what we are exploiting.
Has this been exploited in the wild? Are adversaries already attuned to this vulnerability?
Well, there are some different attacks related with these vulnerabilities. We have different cache poisoning and cache deception attacks, but they weren't really explored using these kind of discrepancies. And so I found that there are many different websites that are vulnerable to this. Right now, we saw some reports of this in bug bounty platforms, but not using the new techniques that I will explain tomorrow.
Is this already on the radar and a concern of companies like Cloudflare? Are they working with you and helping resolve these configuration issues?
Yeah, definitely it's a real concern for them. The Cloudflare actually have a small protection which is called Web Cache Deception Armor, and which shows that they are really interested in solving this problem. But again, it's not really easy for them because sometimes it's not their fault. It's just a combination of using the correct HTTP server and their platform. So it's not that Cloudflare is vulnerable, it's that when combining Cloudflare with Nginx, for example, you will find that you will have this kind of vulnerabilities. So it will be a problem because when you try to solve that from Cloudflare's point of view, they can't do anything because if they would fix it, they would be vulnerable when combined with, I don't know, Apache. So, and if you tell Nginx to fix it, then Nginx will tell you, well, if I fix it, I will be vulnerable with other CDNs. So it's really hard to solve that.
That is a tough conundrum. Let me ask you this. When you talk about these large players like a Cloudflare, there is this sort of ongoing conversation about this monopoly and that some of these players are, for lack of a better term, too big to fail. And when they do fail, it's catastrophic. And like you said, an issue with Cloudflare can wipe out 20% of the internet. So what is your thought on that? Is there an argument to be made to diversify the field? Do we need these large players who are able to see that much of the landscape? What is your thought on that?
Well, it's a big problem because when we see that everyone is using the same platform or the same provider to solve this issue of CDNs, if they fail, of course, we will have a problem. We saw this in the few past weeks and months. So this is also a problem for CDNs. And as you say, Cloudflare is right now 20%. I think Akamai probably has also another 5%, but it's like a really important 5%. So yeah, when they fail, we all pay the consequences. But the problem is, if we diversify, then we are inviting other people to create their own CDNs, which will also include new vulnerabilities, because being able to solve the problem, which is everyone behaving the same way when they see a request or when they see anything, is really hard. So probably the solution is not going to be either diversifying or using a single CDN, but to have more interaction between CDNs and HTTP server providers or framework providers, and to make them all follow the same rules and the same ways of developing things.
Is that going to be that sounds great, but
yeah.
Is that happening on any level now?
No, and we saw this, as I said, with HTTP smuggling, which was one of the worst vulnerabilities in terms of web security. And no one was able to actually solve this problem with HTTP smuggling, so probably we will not see a real solution for these kind of attacks other than adding more protections, and it's going to be a matter of you knowing how to configure your servers and knowing how to combine them and evaluate using the tools that we provide to know if there's a problem, a path confusion, a vulnerability or not.
And how are we going to search for those? If I'm in my shop, is your paper going to give me, your briefing going to tell me step by step how I'm going to go and check out and make sure my configurations are appropriate? Well,
that's exactly what my paper is going to do. It's going to not only tell you which are the new techniques that you can use to exploit these systems or the vulnerabilities, but I'm also going to provide a well-tiled guide to explain how to find these discrepancies, how they could be exploited, and how to combine the different HTTP servers and CDNs in order to protect your system and don't have these kind of issues.
Wonderful. Can you tell our audience where they can check your briefing out and get more information?
Well, it's everything probably on the Black Hat webpage, and also in Portsfigure we are going to add a new topic tomorrow for web cache deception. So it's really useful for people that want to understand how these vulnerabilities work and that want to find them, because it's going to be really useful for those that are using this for bug bounty programs. and they can all use those topics to learn and to understand how they behave, those systems behave.
Wonderful. I also want to send our best wishes to your colleague at Portswigger, James Kettle. We missed him this year, so please tell him we hope to see him next year.
Definitely. He was really sad not being able to be here. We were also really happy because we got 3 talks accepted at Black Hat, which was a big thing for us. And yeah, definitely we will see him next year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Martin Doyhenard from Portswigger.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.